Anna, it's good to see you. Let's emphasize this because every time that I did TV this week, I wanted to talk about the law because sometimes with the salaciousness of what's going on, that gets lost. What is the legal standard, Anna, to be able to DQ, to disqualify a prosecutor in the state of Georgia?
You're right, Katie. I think that the legal standard has gotten lost amongst all the mudslinging that we saw in court this week. But it is really important for people to understand what the standard is here. It is that there is an actual conflict. It's not enough to show an appearance of impropriety under Georgia law. What the defense has to show here to meet their burden of disqualifying Fani Willis means that they have to show that her relationship with Nathan Wade caused or gave rise to a personal or financial interest that gave her a kind of interest or incentive in convicting Trump and others. And so I think that what they needed to show here this week is that at the very least, either Wade and Willis commingled their assets or shared some type of income, or they needed to show that these vacations that they took together that Wade allegedly paid for, it was something that was not reimbursed and that therefore Fani Willis benefited from those vacations financially. And it kind of amounted to a kickback scheme of sorts. I do not think, however, that the defense ultimately met that burden. There was some testimony from Fani Willis and Nathan Wade under oath in which they said that Fani Willis did reimburse those trips in cash. And the defense also failed to show that there was any sharing of assets or income. So based on what we've seen so far, I don't think that they have met that actual conflict standard, although there has been some talk that it's possible that Judge McAfee could potentially apply a lower standard of appearance of impropriety. I am a bit skeptical that he will do that, however.
And I do want to talk about something that hasn't been raised very much in the last 24 hours because it just happened yesterday afternoon. The cross-examination of Terrence Bradley. Terrence Bradley was the former divorce lawyer for Nathan Wade. As we know, the attorney-client privilege issues kicked in. There was a whole argument legally about whether there was fraud perpetrated and that it could pierce the attorney-client privilege and all of those confidential communications could come out. Judge McAfee ultimately ruled no, there was no fraud that didn't meet the legal standard to be able to do that. But that's not really what I want to ask you. I want to ask you about the cross-examination by the state of Georgia. They went hard against Terrence Bradley, bringing up the allegations that he had sexually assaulted a law firm employee at the law firm that he had, worked at with Nathan Wade. Your thoughts about that strategy? Do you think that it was effective, or do you think that maybe it was an overstep?
It could have been an overstep, Katie. I'm of two minds of it. Remember, earlier in the proceeding, Judge McAfee did indicate that he wanted to have a conversation with Terrence Bradley in private about the communications that Terrence Bradley said that he had with Nathan Wade about his relationship with Fani Willis and the crucial question of when that relationship started. There's a factual dispute because Fani Willis and Nathan Wade say that it started in 2022 after he was appointed, whereas the defense counsel have represented that it started in 2019. And Terrence Bradley seems to potentially have knowledge of when the start of the relationship was that he had through communications with Nathan Wade that he said was a part of privileged discussions related to Nathan Wade's divorce. But what this cross-examination elicited from Terrence Bradley made Judge McAfee really wonder if Terrence Bradley had been fully forthcoming in his testimony about those conversations being privileged. So this impeachment of Terrence Bradley on the sexual assault allegations by the state made Judge McAfee ultimately say that he wanted to have further conversations with Terrence Bradley about whether his other conversations with Nathan Wade were in fact privileged. So that could really come back to bite the prosecution if it turns out that that Terrence Bradley has some kind of information that is inconsistent with what the prosecution has put forward. With that said, however, it could be the case that the state thinks that Terrence Bradley, whatever information that he's going to give Judge McAfee or that they expect to give Judge McAfee, they might be concerned that he is not being honest about that information. And so they wanted to impeach his credibility by bringing up the fact that he had a falling out with Nathan Wade because of the circumstances surrounding this alleged sexual assault. So it could come back to bite the prosecution, or it could be effective. It really all just depends on what happens in that private conversation between Judge McAfee and Terrence Bradley.